Hello and thank you for joining us. Today our guest is Alexander Grace from Red Pill Interviews. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back. Now, in our last conversation we talked about how you're not attracted to women who are overweight. If anyone missed that interview, I can put a link in the description box below. Now, during that conversation I showed you a picture of a woman, if you remember this, and you said that you found that woman extremely desirable. Let's bring up that picture again. Yes, I remember. Yeah, beautiful woman. But I want to ask you about a comment that you made after we finished filming. You said that as gorgeous as she was, she would never be enough for you. What did you mean by that? The point I was making is that it doesn't matter how beautiful a woman is, my sexual attraction to her will decrease at some point, and I'll be more attracted to other women. Do you mean that she's going to lose her looks as she gets older, and you're going to be attracted to younger women? Well, that can happen too, but no, I'm not talking about that. Even if she stays hot forever, my sexual attraction to her will begin to diminish. Well, that might be true for you, but not everyone's like that. There's probably a bunch of men who would think, if I could have sex with a girl from that picture, that's all I'd need to be happy. Well, that's true. There are some men who think like that. They think, if I could get that girl into a relationship and just have sex with her all day, every day, that's all I'll need to be happy. But that's not true, and that's why I want to educate men about this, to help them avoid making some really big mistakes. So what is it that you want men to understand? That one of the most important factors in your sexuality is known as novelty. So if you've had sex with a woman 100 times, then the novelty's worn off, and she's not going to be as desirable to you as she was the very first time you saw her naked. This is a phenomenon found throughout the animal kingdom in males of every animal species. It's known as the Coolidge Effect. The Coolidge Effect, is that named after the US President Calvin Coolidge? It is actually, yeah. I'll tell you the story. So, back when Calvin Coolidge was president, he and his wife were visiting an experimental government farm, and they were being shown around separately. And when they came to the chickens, the Mrs. Coolidge, she saw that the rooster was mating with all the different chickens, and she asked the attendant, is it always like this? Is he always mating as frequently? And the attendant says, yeah, like dozens of times every single day. And Mrs. Coolidge says, tell that to Mr. Coolidge. And when the attendant told the president when he came to the chickens, the president asked, is it always with the same hen? And the attendant said, oh no, always with different hens. And the president said, tell that to Mrs. Coolidge. Okay, so the joke being that the rooster is interested in sex because he's got all these variety of hens that he can sleep with, and President Coolidge would also be more interested in sex if he had a variety of females. Well, that's right, but this isn't a joke, it's a measurable scientific phenomenon. In the original experiment, they used rats. So they put a male rat in a box with 5 females, and he did what any male rat would do. He mated with them furiously and repeatedly, until eventually he was exhausted. And then it didn't matter if the females would, nudge him or rub him or lick him, nothing was getting him interested. But do you know what eventually did re-spark his arousal? I'm guessing the introduction of a new female? Yeah, that's right. With the arrival of a new female, his sexual arousal was completely renewed and he happily mated with her. And there have been other experiments? Yeah, heaps. They've actually measured the dopamine levels of rats when they're making love, and they've shown that there's a dopamine spike when he's having sex with a new partner as opposed to one of the old ones. They did a study with sheep, and they showed that male rams were able to climax way quicker when they were presented with a new partner as opposed to an old one. But these are all studies done on animals whose biology is pretty basic, I don't think that the data can be transferred to humans. They've done experiments with humans too. Even here in Australia they did a study where they measured men's reactions to watching pornography. Yeah, have a look at this graph. Okay, so what you're seeing here is that the men's arousal level is decreasing the longer they watch, the same old pornography, until this spike. That spike is when the researchers made a sudden switch in the pornography they were watching and showed them something that they hadn't seen before. Okay, so I get that men are attracted to novelty, they crave sexual variety and always looking for the next newest thing, but I don't understand why this is important for us to know. Like, why is this relevant to the actual lives of men? Why are we even talking about this? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. The first one is moral. In our culture, we glorify the monogamous couple. And the message that's implicitly being received by young men is that all they need to do is find a good woman and then they'll be happy. And conversely, if you're unhappy or if you're unsatisfied, still craving new sexual experiences with different women, then that's indicative of some kind of moral deficiency. You're saying that men are made to feel guilty even after they're in a long-term relationship because they still crave sexual variety? Absolutely. We're never told what happens after the fairy tale ends. We're meant to live happily ever after. So what happens to the prince after his 500th lovemaking session with the princess if he's no longer feeling as attracted to her? Well, he starts to feel guilty. He thinks, I'm meant to be in my happily ever after. I'm meant to be completely satisfied, but I'm not. What's wrong with me? So what message would you give the prince? I would tell him that happily ever after, at least in the sexual sense, with one woman, is a myth. That he has nothing to feel guilty about just because he noticed, the princess's sister or her handmaids. I'd tell him that his brain is hardwired for novelty and that what he's going through is completely normal and completely natural. Well, what about practical advice? Would you tell him to divorce the princess? No, not necessarily, though this does bring us to why it's important for the second reason, which is practical. It's really important that men understand the Coolidge Effect and their own biology so that they can take that into account when they're making decisions about their lives. So are you saying that men should have open relationships? Look, whether you date multiple women, no women, or just one woman, that's a big topic, and I think we better save that for a future interview. But suffice to say, whatever decision you make, it's important that you understand that your attraction to a woman, your sexual attraction, will fade over time due to the Coolidge Effect. But I'm still not sure how he should take this into account. What would that look like? Well, it could just be as simple as this, If you decide that you want to spend your life with just one woman, make sure that you have a lot more in common than just good sex, So even if the things are really hot and heavy to start with, that will fade over time. So ask yourself, what else do you have in common? Do you have shared goals, shared beliefs, shared values, a mutual respect? These are much stronger foundations to build a relationship upon. But aren't you simplifying things a little bit when you say that sexual passions are going to fade? Humans are a lot more complex than animals. If your sex life with your long-term partner is decreasing, you can try all sorts of things to try and reinvigorate it. Yes, but you can't do that indefinitely. For a little while you can just try new positions or crazy fetishes or something like that, but it won't last because eventually the novelty wears off. There are even couples who try dressing up like they're completely different people, like role-playing. And that's a direct, attempt to combat the Coolidge Effect, but it won't be successful. This is all very depressing. You're basically saying that a long-term relationship's sex life is just doomed to failure. I'm saying that your arousal level will never be as high as it was at the beginning of a relationship. But if you can understand and accept that, you can still have a wonderful sex life, even with a partner, who's been your partner for many years. It can be loving, comforting, beautiful, in a sort of familiar kind of way. But it won't have that fiery, hot passion that it had at the beginning of the relationship. And I understand that might be depressing news for some people to hear, but I really think that it's essential that they know it. This seems to be a cruel trick of nature that undermines the very function of monogamy. I don't understand, why are men built this way? It's because we are genetically programmed to spread our genes as far and wide as possible. On an emotional and cultural level, men do have a desire to look after their children, to provide for them and to be there for them as they grow up. But in a purely physical sense, like at the biological level, what we're really driven to do is just impregnate as many women as possible. That's why when you see, a woman you've never seen before, a young, beautiful woman, you get really aroused, because you're excited about the possibility of fulfilling your biological function, and spreading your genes even further. Incidentally, do you know who, at least in a biological sense, was the most successful man of all time? I'm guessing someone who had sex with lots of women? That's right, it was Genghis Khan. although I think the correct pronunciation is Chinggis. But in addition to conquering empires, this guy impregnated a lot of women. They did a study in 2003, and they found that the descendants from his children and his children's children and so forth was so numerous that there are actually 16 million people who could claim a direct lineage to Genghis Khan. So from a biological point of view, he's the most successful man to have ever lived. Okay, but even assuming that the Coolidge Effect is real, we shouldn't just be slaves to our biology, shouldn't we work to overcome it? Well, you can try, but I would ask you, why would you want to be at war with your own nature? Because it's bad, and we should always be striving to be better, to improve. I disagree. I don't think that the Coolidge Effect is good or bad. It just is. Nature isn't evil, it's just neutral. So then, if this is just a neutral fact, why does the culture resist it so strongly? Well, I think that there's some fear about what might happen if men were encouraged to act on their natural impulses. Well, that's right, if you tell men that it's perfectly natural to crave sexual variety, then you're just encouraging them to run off and sleep with as many women as possible. The social consequences would be disastrous. I'm not saying that it's a perfect system, but when two people make a monogamous commitment to each other, it at least provides some kind of, stability, right? And a lot of stability for their children too. I can't imagine that many of Genghis Khan's children actually knew their father. And, in the modern day, we have access to research, and it's very clear, that children who grow up knowing their fathers are emotionally way better adjusted. So are you saying then that this is a good thing? That in order for society to function, men's sexual impulses need to be restricted? No, I'm just saying that it's understandable how this came about. Women were frightened because a woman who's pregnant or has very young children is very vulnerable. She needs to know that the father of those children is going to stick around and provide for her. So when she contemplated, the possibility that he's going to go off and get another girl pregnant, well, that's terrifying for her because she's dependent upon him. And then suddenly all the fruits of his labor are going to have to be split, or worse still, he was going to abandon her altogether in favor of this new woman. That terrified women, and so they were looking for a way to prevent this. So is this all just some conspiracy thought up by women as a means to control men and make them provide for them? Is that it? This isn't happening at a conscious level. It's not like women sat around and plotted and planned, and schemed on how to control men's behavior. They just felt vulnerable and frightened, and so they wanted to exert some kind of control over male sexuality. And that was the first, time that, men started to be shamed for their sexuality, because shame is such a powerful instrument of controlling people. Of course, in the modern culture, it's so deeply ingrained that a man who just has sex with anyone he wants, never makes a commitment, that's superficial, that's selfish. That's so deeply ingrained that women don't even need to exert control over men. Men exert that control over themselves. They feel guilty, and so they restrain their own behavior. So what do you suggest men do? Well, like I said before, how you conduct your dating life and your relationships is a big topic, better save for a different interview. But at the very least, don't feel guilty about craving novelty and sexual variety. That's completely normal and natural. And on a practical level, whatever decisions you make sure you factor in the Coolidge Effect. Just remember, it doesn't matter how hot she is, eventually your sexual attraction to her will start to fade. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. Have you ever had a woman try and shame you because you crave novelty or sexual variety? Have you noticed the Coolidge Effect operating in your own life? Let us know in the comment section below. That's right, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and hit that like button. This channel is made possible by people like you, so if you want to show your support, check out our Patreon page. There's a link in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.